We now go to the question. Now this is how it goes. We take 3 at a time, possibly 4, and try to be on to the point, either making your question or making a comment. We are welcoming suggestions because the business of this is to get ideas from the general public so that we can implement our own suggestions, which will be posted on our various sites and so on.
Good morning, everyone, and congratulations to all who organized the forum today. Congratulations as well to everybody who has come out to the session this morning. The issue of violence against women led me to think of the perpetrators of violence. Why are they doing it? And I remember on my way to work one day passing by, I won't say what area, and seeing a mother hitting a 3-year-old child on the head several times because the child didn't want to do what she was telling them. And I wanted to think about our society generally and how many times through anger or rage we hit, beat, buff up, quarrel with someone else. Because I think violence against women is just part of a wider lack of respect that we have for each other. And that goes back to the family. And therefore the solution to violence against women, sure we have to report if we hear a man beating a woman next door. But I think that if we want a solution, we need to go a bit further as to what in us as a society leads us to not respect others. And in our own families, we could think, well, the child deserved the licks, you know? And then you get vexed and you shout behind the child because the child deserved the licks. But is that really discipline, or is that just getting our steam? And therefore, that's transferred sometimes into the adult world where you have somebody less powerful and somebody more powerful, and we might tend to react the same. So just to think about maybe part of our solution to violence against women could go back to how we deal with relationships at all levels, at the family level as well, and how we try to build persons of character so nobody will think that they have a right to treat anybody in any way but one of respect. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. The name is Ena Maharaj. I believe Mrs. Margaret Sampson Brown identified a very serious problem. It's a societal problem. I'm not dealing with Mayor Timke this morning, who is a man of great integrity and honesty. It was a slip of the tongue, and we apologize with the pain, and it was dealt with. I would like to suggest that, as Mr. Singh identified, that this discussion needs to go out of the university. This is a serious problem because we have a serious problem of alcoholism in the country, in a particular community to which I belong. Very serious problem. And there is a very serious problem in my community of domestic violence. So we need to go and take the forum outside of the thinking issue and deal with it as a social problem. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the panel, my name is Dr. Vidya Ena Maharaj, and I must commend you all for this panel discussion this morning. But as former mayor said, why there are not many men here this morning? The theme should have been violence on people on the whole. And Ms. Margaret Simpson Brown, I sympathize with you and your passion in the work that you do. But you did mention 500 women who were murdered. What about the number of men who have been murdered over the last similar period? And I think it's all a cultural, social, religious, and financial and economic issue. Because a lot of women stay in relationships, in violent relationships, because of self-sufficiency. And because of, rather not self-sufficiency, dependency. And I have been working with some of them in the past, and they say that they're accustomed to a particular lifestyle, and they would rather stay in that scenario instead of going on their own and, as we say, eat rice and salt. So this dependency syndrome with our women needs to be corrected from both cultural, religious, economic, and educational. We need to attend our schools to see what's happening. We are creating these monsters who are violent, and they are violent not only to women who ought to be respected, but to each other. And that is the sink of this situation that we are in, former mayor. I agree with you. And I say a lot of our women have comfortable, safe lives, but there are many of us who need to help those who are in situations. We need more volunteers to come out and help all of them in domestic situations. And trust is another aspect of it. Women, they feel betrayed if they trust their friends or the police in particular. The police, they're not doing their work properly in that. They always say, you look for that. So, yeah, so those are my, suggestions.
All right, I'm going to ask, let me ask.
First of all, let me say that I never describe anybody as monsters. That's not correct. I said that violence against women is a monster. It's totally different. I want to clarify. I'm saying the whole issue of violence against women is a monster. I'm not saying that the men who commit violence against women are monsters.
I would also want, I respectfully want to disagree with one or two of your comments, Dr. Maharaj, in respect of the generalizing that police are not doing your work. You need to perhaps, we need to understand that there has been, first we're not doing insufficient training in respect of that. 2015 we trained almost 800 police officers, sensitizing them in respect of empowering responses for when persons make reports. And today we are dealing with domestic violence, murders in respect of domestic violence. So we want to stay focused on the issue of the domestic violence. Okay, I'm corrected, violence in general also, but I spoke, my stats is about domestic violence with men and women victims of domestic violence. If I had information that it's a general issue, I would have had another person sit here to talk about the general violence. So my stat is about domestic violence, the 300 cases from 2005 and 2006. And I support what you said about the whole issue about going into communities. It's critical, and there have been some intervention in this way.
Just, I know Prof. Watson has said this, but one of the key goals of today's session is that we came out of this with a number of actual strategies, actual concrete recommendations that we have taken from the people here to state officials, to local government bodies, that we can say 10 excellent concrete recommendations came out that can actually show. They can be shown as deliverables, they can have targets. So if in your comments you could also focus on empowering us to put together that list collectively. We know this is an issue about which people have a lot to say, but we also need to be able to move as advocates to concrete things that we want to see pursued and can then strike off as having been achieved.
Today, as a victim of that violence, I want to say the police, they are doing their work, okay? But when it reaches to the courts, the victim is the one who is going through more stress. Because if I put everything in order, summon serve, the two parties appear, the magistrate knows he's doing all right, adjourn the matter. And the adjourn the matter, you put the victim in the box. The victim speaks. And for an example, since August of last year, I was put in the box. Up to now, the perpetrator was not put in the box. And this is happening in the Arima Magistrate Second Court. You know? So I would like something to go to the courts, so the judiciary could play a vital role. Because what happened to the victim all this time? The victim is suffering in silence. It is hurting. So I would like something to be done in that area. Because it comes out like this. There's a backlog, and why is the magistrate encouraging that backlog? He has his space. He is getting his salary like everybody else. But what is it about the victim? The victim needs help. The victim needs assistance. So this is my thought. This is why I made the time to come here this morning. So that the judiciary will play their part in a more meaningful way. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's true that disrespect and violence is endemic not only in Trinidad and Tobago but throughout the world today. The former mayor mentioned, compared our situation to Syria. And some people might think that that's an exaggeration, but when you start to look at how common this violence is, it's not an unrealistic comparison. And while that general violence and disrespect is endemic everywhere, the particular violence against women is something that needs to be addressed. Again, just look at our composition of the audience, how few of us men are here. My recommendation is that we look at introducing martial arts in the primary and secondary school to all students, but in particular, making it available to girls and young women. And I'm saying this not as a means of using violence to combat violence, but to instill that self-discipline, that self-respect, to infuse not only martial arts training with that ethos of human values, so that you know when and where to use it, but that they're trained and that the teachers, the instructors are also screened for character. Because simply saying that you are a martial arts instructor or having a black belt does not give you a clean bill of health. But my concrete recommendation is that if more women were trained to protect themselves physically, less men would have the audacity to violate.
Good morning, everybody. Nicole Hendrickson, male advocate. I have a minority view about what happened, in that I think we missed a teachable moment specifically for our young people and children. In that we had a person in office who for years said the same thing. My perspective is, why did it shift? I understand the incident that he mentioned, but why did it shift this year? We normally say that we only talk to children about bullying. This person said something in office that made him a minority. To me, in my humble view, a minority became a new majority, and they then became a new minority. How are we teaching children to possibly talk, come together to say, okay, fine, you don't understand my issue, but let me understand your issue so we could talk? My humble opinion is that we should have left him in office, tried to see if we could have then changed his mind, because he did admit that he did not understand what he did. That is a huge position for somebody in office, and I would think a male to take. Right? Then work with him, because he already has an office and he's been saying it for years. Work with him, and if then he couldn't shift, then we do something differently. I'm very, very concerned about how we treated with this in terms of the children's eyes. We talk a lot about bullying in schools. To me, I think, in my humble opinion, we did the same thing. My suggestion would be, is that let the corporations, because I think it lied in the space where it happened, let the corporations take this and have this as a national discussion.
Hi, morning everybody, Brandon O'Brien. Before, I can't help but want to comment on one or two things to Dr. Maharaj. The first thing that crosses my mind is patriarchal violence. That was the term that was used by Mr. Sanata. Patriarchal violence has multiple victims, men, women, and children. And when we see violence being perpetrated, and at least I think that's true in our nation, when we see violence perpetrated, regardless of the victim, it's worth looking at that as potentially patriarchal violence. I think that's important because young men in the English-speaking Caribbean are being taught that in order to display yourself as a man, violence is one of those prerequisites. Strength, physical strength is one of those prerequisites. And it connects to Mr. Noguera's comment about teaching young girls martial arts. And while I don't think that's unimportant, it, to me, kind of feels like the same, accidentally, almost the same language of Mayor Timke, is that women are responsible for their danger and their safety and not the people who bring them to danger. And I think that might be a dangerous kind of precedent to set. But all of that is aside from the question that I want to ask to Dr. Hussain and to Mr. Sanata. I can't help but think about the protest through the lens of equity feminist Christina Hoff Sommers. yeah, who argues that contemporary feminism might be too radical and actually is potentially creating hostilities or hostile groups out of men who consider themselves activists for the rights of women and men, right? Some of them call themselves men's rights activists, that they become hostile because the politics of feminism, I don't agree with it, by the way, but I'm wondering whether or not the average person's perspective of the protest the other day might be the same as Dr. Summers, that contemporary feminists in Trinidad and Tobago have become too radical and they're making enemies instead of making partners. I agree with Nicole's statement to some degree that there was a potential for partnership with Mayor Timke. Not to say that his statements don't deserve some sort of active response, and I do think that the protest was an active response. But a lot of average people thought that that was too radical, and I was wondering, what are your response to those people?